A busy weekend for the Charlotte Hornets. We got a lot to talk about today. Mark Williams gets injured, but we'll start with the good news here. The Hornets, free money, free assets. Jeff Peterson at it again. We'll discuss all of what happened over the weekend today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free. We are available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. There's Doug Branson. You can find him on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I imagine he's going to be writing about a lot today with Hornets media bringing in the season. This is when it really feels like, oh, it's here. We're getting ready for training camp. We're getting ready for preseason, regular season about to start soon after that. Everyhornetsboxscore.com. Go check out Doug's Substack and then listen to the Locked On Hornets show where I'm Walker Mail. I'm also on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Are you feeling what I'm feeling in the air with Media Day here? Like Media Day, it's always the tough decision there is to consolidate all the sound bites and the big newsworthy items. We know about the health. We know about maybe Charles Lee says something about a role about a certain player. But I always love the consolidation of what's important that comes from Media Day.
And there's so much unknown. I mean, how explicit is Charles Lee going to be about what he wants certain guys to work on, what the strategy is going to be this year, how talkative is he going to be? I mean, this is our first look really at Charles Lee getting down to business. We've had press conferences, but this will be him getting down to business, and I can't wait.
I can't either. And they got a lot to talk about today too. Okay, so you and I decided, and really you kicked it to me. I agree with you. Good news before the bad news, because there's both to discuss here with the Hornets and what happened on Saturday. I believe that's when the trade came in. But over the weekend, we saw Jeff Peterson involved once more in what was a blockbuster trade, like something that came out of nowhere. I know people had speculated that Karl Anthony Towns maybe could find himself in New York, but the timing was weird. The way it all happened, it was weird. Minnesota trades Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks in exchange for Julius Randle, no longer a part of Hornets trade discussions, hypothetical trade discussions. Karl Anthony Towns goes to New York in exchange for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. To make the money work, the Hornets step in as a third team so the Knicks can offload a salary, and the salary is going to come in form of Daquan Jeffries, a draft pick the Hornets are going to collect, and also cash considerations. This feels like Jeff Peterson, Doug. The philosophy of our new general manager is to say yes to free money when it's offered, unlike Mitch Kupchak in that regime when we didn't really see them involved in these types of trades.
Yeah, so it looks like, and I think this deal is still coming together. We should note that The final deal has not been reached. I think there are multiple complications happening. So the details of this could slightly, or maybe even honestly, they could majorly change. I mean, remember when we were talking about the Hornets acquiring Josh Green from Dallas, we thought it was a small thing. It turned into one of the largest in terms of number of teams and assets moving around, turned into one of, if not the largest deal in NBA history. And part of that deal was Jeff Peterson in an earlier deal that was reported maneuvering Reggie Jackson to back and forth to Denver and assets coming in. So these things get super complicated, but the point here is that the Hornets are involved in it being super complicated and taking advantage of the complicated cap gymnastics that have to occur now, particularly with these aprons that they've set up, the first and second apron, and the penalties that come along with teams getting into those zones. Not only financial penalties, but just penalties on what you can do. And I think that's what the Knicks were up against in making this deal. They had to make salaries match so that they weren't taking on more money than they were sending out, because that would have put them into apron situations. And they're still building out their roster. I think they've got a few open roster spots that they have to take care of. They didn't want to limit themselves. And so I think what's going to happen here is they're essentially going to sign and trade Daquan Jeffries. And then there's cash considerations to Charlotte, which I don't know if it'll exactly match that contract that the Hornets will have to pay to Daquan. But yeah, I think it's like free money and then future draft compensation. We don't know what that draft compensation is going to be. I imagine it's going to be some kind of like second round or multiple second round. The first round pick did go to Minnesota as part of this deal. I don't think it's going to be a first round pick, but they're going to get something for nothing.
Okay, and I didn't even see the first round pick as I was that was going to Minnesota, gathering some information initially. So I was like, yeah, it felt like there should be one. And now here with the Peterson stuff, I was trying to figure out the value too. It would make sense if they were multiple second round picks or even just an unprotected something like that second rounder. I don't know what the kind of value would be. We just know that this is something Jeff Peterson has done already here, Doug. He has been in asset collection mode, whether it was Jeff or even whether it was Schlotkin calling the shots with Mitch Kupchak as the puppet. We saw that this is an organization that decided we're going to take on your first round picks. We're going to take your second round picks. Josh Green, you don't have enough space for him anymore. Cool, we'll take him. OKC, you don't have enough space for the bench players that are actually still pretty good. Like they're NBA players. Cool, we'll take those guys on as well. And it just feels like this is a new direction that they're always. I don't want to say this for Panthers fans because Scott Fitterer like made this phrase taboo, but they're in on every deal. I'm sorry, Panthers fans, but it's a good thing. It feels like the Hornets are in on every deal, and it's a good thing as opposed to Scott Fitterer.
And they're getting stuff done. I mean, we would hear rumblings about the Hornets being involved in discussions around like Donovan Mitchell and other things. But I mean, we went so long, there was this big drought between the Hornets actually being able to be involved in this kind of thing. Does this deal make the Hornets better in the short term? Absolutely not. Like Daquan Jeffries, I don't know if he'll ever play a minute for the Charlotte Hornets, but he's a shooting guard that can't shoot. There's another player rumored, he's playing internationally right now, Dwayne Washington Jr., that could be coming to the Hornets as part of this deal. But again, same sort of situation. I mean, I expect these players to be quickly waived, and even if they're not, I don't expect them to make like a major impact on the roster. But in the long term, you are acquired, if it's multiple second rounds or even if it's a single second round, these things, as we saw in that big 6-team deal that got the Hornets Josh Green, these things get packaged, they get moved around, they're used as sweetener. These are the kind of things that make deals happen, and it's just a huge shift from what we saw in the previous regime, which I call stand patitude. The attitude was to stand pat. It was stand patitude. And, it was like, we've got the assets. We're going to go see what's going to happen, and we're not going to get involved in these. We're not going to look to the future. And I think a large part of that was that either everybody's moving in the same direction, everyone's engaged on the present and the future, or you have a situation where no one's engaged on anything but what's happening this season. And I think now we have a situation with Jeff Peterson, but also Schlotkin, where everybody's focused on, let's see what we have this season, but also let's put the building blocks in place that if we have to do major pivot, we can do that in a season or two with all of these draft picks.
The ghosts are still there, though, because there is a transition of philosophy with Mitch Kupchak loving second-round picks and doing a nice job acquiring them during his time as general manager. Jeff Peterson's doing the same thing. So we're not completely out of the way of the Mitch Kupchak thinking. It just feels a little fresher, something, and I like to hear that. I like to see all this stuff happening.
And so what we don't know, though, because Mitch Kupchak's philosophy was acquire second-round picks and either use them and try to make those players into players that could be roster players, or
and did a good job at that, by the way.
Sure. And then, a few of them hit for a second, and then,
I mean, if you have enough of those guys, either way, like not the debate, but like it feels, you turn those guys into trades and first round picks and second contracts. Like a lot of second round picks flame out before they even get to a second deal. Like that, I would bet his record on second round picks is better than a lot of other teams.
Well, okay, no, I'm with you there, but I think there's such a low ceiling. Like even if you hit on some of those second rounds, like it's so rare that you have the Nikola Jokic. I mean, you are super rolling the dice on that situation actually impacting winning on your team. But what Mitch would do a lot is acquire second-round picks and package those for better second-round picks, right? They would fall in love with a guy that was going to fall right outside the first round, and they would move up into that zone and take that guy. What I think, what Jeff Peterson has in mind, what I hope he has in mind, is, again, packaging all of these things either to get all the way into the first round or to acquire a player that is going to significantly impact winning.
All right, let's move on. This is the bad news portion of the show. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
But it's important.
Bees everywhere!
No, it's definitely important. It's just the bad news portion of the show. We have a big injury to a big player, Mark Williams. The rumors were true, folks. Hornets Reddit. I think Chili Willy had it first. He was right. Mark Williams, he's going to be out for 2 weeks with an injury. We'll give you the details on that injury coming up next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season big with the return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We need to take advantage of this maybe now, so we have enough left over for Bet the Buzz. We ran out of all of our funds basically within the first week or two
Bet the Buzz
of the season. So we're going to get all the information from Media Day today, and then we're going to take advantage of this offer from FanDuel, and we're going to be able to bet the Buzz at least for an extra week. It's going to be great. FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. More Locked On Hornets ahead.
So, Walker, you are a radio professional. You have read like Sports Center type news hits on the radio before. Did you ever in your life think that you would bring a segment in with Chili Willy had it first?
What's that? Sources? You have what is it? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. My source is Chili Willy says that he may have seen Mark Williams in a walking boot outside of the hospital. You guys, opinions? Chili Willy? Yeah, that happened. You know what's funny? Like with our little Hornets community, not so little, but I guess it's all relative. With our Hornets community, going to Hornets Reddit, I think that guy actually texts in pretty frequently to WFNZ because we found that we also have a Chili Willy on the WFNZ text line, and it was the same one, according to my producer. So, yeah, man, he had it on Hornets Reddit, and then we got the email that Mark Williams was going to be missing a little time, at least 2 weeks right now of training camp with a tendon injury that he had.
Strained tendon in his left foot.
Strained tendon in his left foot, yeah.
Yeah, he suffered this during a workout. I don't know exactly what that means. Could be some info that we could gather at Media Day. What does workout mean? Does that mean he was like running up and down the floor and strained a tendon? Was it like 5-on-5? What's the situation there that results in the strained tendon in his left foot? Regardless of how it happened, though, they're going to reevaluate him in 2 weeks. So this could go longer than 2 weeks. What we do know is that he's going to sit out training camp, and the start of preseason is the report. So he will miss some game action. But I guess the Hornets would have to hope and are probably going to be a little bit cautious here to make sure that he's available for the first game of the season.
So, I'm seeing in the write-up from the Hornets here that he'll be, as you mentioned, reevaluated in 2 weeks. But you're saying that you've seen since then that he's probably going to miss a couple games to start the regular season?
I mean, that was the report. Let me get exactly where that came from. But yeah, that's the report that I had written down, that he was going to miss the training camp and the start of that was from Tim Bontemps of ESPN.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't get it from the team. Tim Bontemps in there. So the fact that you're going to be that's an issue, right? So if you're saying, hey, we're going to reevaluate him in 2 weeks. Oh, okay. So he might be ready for the regular season. Oh, nah, he's not going to play. No, he's not going to start because that's going to be. I'm just hoping that it doesn't last longer than it has to, because this was the issue last year, right, Doug? We would reevaluate Mark Williams. You thought he might be ready to go. He'd ramp up, and then he would not be ready to take the floor. And I'm just hoping that that doesn't happen again this season. Of course, it's all terrible news. It's not what you want to hear before we even see the first tip in the regular season.
Well, and certainly, and Chili Willy, to his credit, was not happy to report that news.
No, he was
Reddit.
not.
And by the way, when it came out, when Chili Willy put the report on Reddit that he saw Mark Williams in a boot, I believed him immediately because Hornets fans of all NBA fans have a radar on injured Hornets players. It is in our DNA. Talk about Hornets DNA. Us seeing injured Hornets on the sideline, we can spot them if we see them out at Publix, at Harris Teeter. Like, we know an injured Hornet when we see one. Okay.
Well, also, like, he's 7'1", so right. No, I'm sorry. It was the other guy with a 9'9" standing reach. My bad. But
then people on my sickos on subtext, where of course when I put it on subtext when the official news came out, they said, yeah, this was on Reddit a couple days ago. I'm like, I understand. I can't.
Right.
It would be irresponsible for me to come on with only one report from Chili Willy. It's not that I doubted Chili Willy. It's just I needed more than this is no disrespect to Chili William. We needed more.
Thank you, Chilliam.
We needed more than that. And so, yeah, unfortunately we got it. So, all right. So what does this mean for the Charlotte Hornets? This is not good because the Hornets had an opportunity. They've had an opportunity multiple times going back to the previous regime to solidify this center position beyond Mark Williams, and they have not taken those opportunities. They could have drafted Jalen Duren to pair alongside Mark Williams in that draft. Instead, they traded that pick for a worse first-round pick by the numbers, and they passed on the ability to take Jalen Duren. Then they had an opportunity this draft to take Donovan Clingan. They passed on that opportunity to take a project in Salon that I think is likely not to see the floor in any kind of significant way this season, and is an absolute project that could go either way. Instead, so they don't go with Clingan there. And there were question marks heading into that draft about Mark Williams' health. The back injury tried to ramp him up, as you said. We didn't have any solid, I'm 100%. We had a lot of vague quotes about Mark Williams being excited to get back onto the floor. But there was still this, I think, thing lingering in the air about what was going to happen when he went full go, 5-on-5, game action, preseason action. How was that back going to hold up? And now on top of that, if we were doing Family Feud and it was top 3 things on the board that scares you about big men in the NBA when it comes to injuries, number 1 answer on the board would be ding, back, which he had last season. Number 2 answer on the board, ding, would be feet. We worry about feet with big men, and here we have another injury.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, this would be the last round of Family Feud where 85 of the 100 people answer back and then the rest of the 15 answer foot. It's a tie, and you need to figure out who's going to the bonus round. That's the round that we're talking about. It's those 2 things, and you're right. So here are the injuries that Mark Williams has suffered since becoming an NBA player. He just suffered the foot injury that was released over the weekend. We got that breaking news. He's had, I guess, the same back injury that's logged twice here because he did go back into a game and then wasn't able to play the rest of the year. So a back injury that lasted a long time. We go back to 2023 at the end of the 2022-23 season. He had a few ankle injuries. He had a few ankle flare-ups, and then he had the thumb injury in March of 2023. So there are a lot of different areas where Mark is being injured, and I'm trying to figure out, Doug, if I like that it's a new injury or if I dislike that it's a new injury. Because of the Family Feud scenario, I'm glad that his back isn't flaring up. That would be worse. That would be worse. So I'm glad it's not that. I also am not glad, of course, that there's something new popping up here with Mark and that the timelines being reported, it's not like he's going to miss a couple months at this point in time. But going back to the Bill Simmons pod, Bill was mentioning how all these teams will just lie now about timelines, like the Porzingis timeline, where it just keeps going and going and going. Yeah, he'll be ready he'll be ready by this time. I just hope that's not what's happening here with Mark.
I think the NBA cracked down on that a little bit because there was
of the Mark situation.
Yeah, there was this long running joke on Josh Lloyd's podcast for the Locked On Podcast Network. He does Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Fantastic! You better be listening to that right now. Get ready for fantasy season. But he had a long running joke on his podcast and on his Twitter feed about doubtful Mark Williams. Mark Williams was not. There was no doubt.
He was out.
The only doubt was on the report, but everyone knew that he wasn't going to play. but he was listed for doubtful forever. And I think
he was outful. They listed him as doubtful, and he was outful.
He was outful
every single time. Right. Every time.
So the NBA has cleaned that up. So I don't think we're going to see that. But you can still do the reevaluation kind of trick. Like one cool trick.
Well, and it's the offseason. This is what the NFL did too. Like, if for all you fantasy football players, not even just fantasy basketball, but Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, they were lying about McCaffrey and Puka Nakua's injuries. And they were saying, like, yeah, they should be fine. Puka on IR. McCaffrey hadn't even played it down. So it's because you don't have to abide by any rules. Once you get to the start of the season, now you have to let people know what the injury report is. But before that, you don't have to make stuff up entirely, but you can stretch the truth on some of these injuries, and we'll see. We'll see just how accurate this report is, and it leaves you wiggle room. We'll reevaluate him. You're right. That's the old trick, and so they don't really have to tell you the whole truth right now.
Yeah, and look, if this is a minor thing and he is reevaluated in 2 weeks and they're like, he's good, and he plays, then, everything remains as it was, as we've been talking about, which is that this is a show-me season, that at the middle of the season or the trade deadline, they could pivot and become bad. But if this is serious and he's going to miss 20, 30 games to open the season, or he comes back and he's not 100% healthy and he goes out again and it's constant on-off with Mark Williams, I don't know how they function defensively as a team without Mark Williams. Like, Nick Richards is a fine backup and got a lot of starter play last season and played admirably. But they're not going to surprise anyone in the NBA. They're going to have a tough time doing that with Mark Williams. But without Mark Williams, it's going to be impossible. And you have to, this is serious, then I think the Hornets' strategy for this season is very much going to be like, all right, how do we get our team in a situation where we can acquire as many assets as possible and pivot to, acquiring something in the next offseason, but we're not focused really on this season much at all.
We should have, when it pops up, a Friday news dump scale, and just how Friday news dump worthy was the breaking report. This gets pretty close to a 10 out of 10. I would say that it's probably like an 8.5 out of 10. This dropped after 9 p.m. on Friday.
Well, yes, okay, that's fair. But it's not like it happened on Monday and they held it till Friday. Apparently it happened on Thursday, so they held it. They could have done it Thursday night. They could have done it Friday morning.
Right.
They decided to do it Friday night. I'm with you.
Well, I mean, Reddit saw it on Thursday. Chili Willy saw it on Thursday.
There's no news dumping on Reddit. When someone sees it, they go to it.
That's right. All right, let's move on. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
Doug has been working the polls on the YouTube channel. He's been asking you questions. You like that? I bet you do like that. Yeah, that would be something right up your alley, the way you've been talking on this pod lately. The last segment still to come here. We'll talk about the polls on the YouTube channel, plus maybe finish up with some Mark Williams Media Day questions. What are some of the Media Day questions that you want to hear today as they host it at 11 o'clock? Still to come, Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time? Game Time has new features called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. And Game Time Picks, it filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. All of the benefits, too, come from Game Time, man. It's awesome stuff. Game Time Picks, curation, making it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So it's not just sporting events. They have all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You get seat views too. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You know exactly what you're purchasing, and they give you a lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. I really don't know what excuse there is to not go and visit Game Time for your tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. More Locked On Hornets at. The Hornets did send out an email as well announcing the official training camp roster. Remember, they're going to go to Durham. They're going to have their training camp held at Cameron Indoor Stadium this year or on Duke's campus. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring all the stars, all the regular players. You get that. But some of the other names that might be of interest, just some guys on the outside going to be battling for roster spots, playing time. Some of those guys, Marcus Garrett is going to be on this roster. You also have a couple of Caleb McConnell from Rutgers. Caleb McConnell is going to be on this roster as well. Moussa Diabate, of course, on the two-way contract. That last one, I believe, is what he signed. Keontae Johnson as well. We remember him, an addition from this past offseason. So those are some of the outside names. With the training camp roster, it's set here, Doug, and I guess we'll figure out what happens with Daquan Jeffries and if somebody gets cut for Jeffries to be on the roster, if that really is just, hey, we're helping you out with the money, probably the latter. So that's the training camp roster. Anything interesting there with some of those guys at the back end or nothing really?
No, because, I mean, what's different about this season relative to the past couple of seasons we've experienced with the Charlotte Hornets is that the Hornets didn't wait till the last second to do their homework. So they filled out a lot of their roster prior to getting to this point in training camp. So we're not seeing some of the late additions that we've seen in previous seasons.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the names that you just mentioned are familiar names if you paid attention to Summer League. They've been on training camp rosters before. So kudos to the Hornets for getting their assignments in early.
It's funny how much it worked for him a couple times, right? I mean, Ish Smith gave you this bright spot. Dennis Smith Jr. was
a big one. Yeah.
That was a valuable pick for them. I mean, Rapide Sonk, all these backup point guards that they picked up last second. It did work out, kind of, and I'm just glad they're doing
it. It worked out tremendously. The playoff success that those teams showed were just tremendous. I'll always remember it.
Got the banners right now that I'm looking at above my computer. Almost made, not really, the playoffs. The polls, Doug, what'd you put up there on the YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I'm doing more polls. If you go to the YouTube community page, obviously follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hornets. Doing more of those. Wanting to get certainly now as we approach the beginning of the season, want to get a read on the pulse of what's going on here with the Hornets fan base. So this one's funny. I put this up 4 days ago, so that's what, Wednesday. So it was before this went up before even we had the Chilly Willy intel. And the question was, how do you feel about the Hornets center depth this season? I think this was off our discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Of the center position. So the choices were confident, we have solid options; neutral, it depends on player health; concerned, we need more depth; unsure, need to see more games; and neutral, it depends on player health, coming in at 64%. Confident, we have solid options, 19%. So
yeah.
Now I think that would be much more difficult. I think people would be with the Mark Williams news, even though, again, we could come back on this podcast 2 weeks from now and be like, he's fine, moving on. So that is a possibility. So
it's not devastating. It's pretty annoying, though. It's pretty annoying as a Hornets fan. But it's not devastating.
And we've said this over and over, which is that the trauma that we've experienced over the past couple of seasons, any little injury, no matter how minor, is going to make us go into doom and gloom. And so that's why it's really important for this new training staff, not only to do things in this offseason, this training camp period, to get guys ramped up, ready to go so that they never get injured to begin with. But when you do have the freak injury or you do have the issue, that you can quickly get them back on the court so it doesn't seem apocalyptic. And that takes me to the next poll, which is, what aspect of the Hornets management changes are you most excited about? I put new coaching energy with Coach Lee, improved training and performance staff, and ownership's new philosophy and engagement. 59% of folks thought the new coaching energy with Charles Lee excited them most, followed by 31% saying ownership's new philosophy and engagement, and then trailing that, 11% said the improved training and performance staff.
I think if I were to vote on that poll, I would probably go with the ownership, just because it means bigger picture. You might lose your coach with things not working out. It happens all the time. But maybe owners leave, but they don't leave for 20 to 25 years. So you're stuck with those guys for a lot longer if they do ever leave the organization. So with Schlotkin seemingly putting forth a different philosophy on how to build a team, that's the thing that I'm most confident in. It's the most welcomed change, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think if I had changed the poll question to what do you think is most important, I think ownership's new philosophy and engagement would have gotten maybe not more votes than Coach Lee, but slightly close that gap. But when you're most excited about something, I think fans are most excited by Charles Lee, the video that we've already seen of him doing the Summer League training camp. His energy is infectious, and I think that's going to affect the players as well. So I think that's the easiest. It's so much easier to get excited over Coach Lee than it is like Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall, but it is more, you're right. Like it gives you more confidence. It is more important to the overall product. And Charles Lee is a function of this ownership group being engaged and being able to close the deal with a highly desired coaching talent like Charles Lee.
100%. And I don't know how excited you can be off of like a better training staff, but you might get excited once there's not as many injuries anymore. Like it's something that sneaks up on you. You don't realize, oh yeah, man, we didn't suffer as many injuries anymore. Maybe that is in part because of the new training staff. Is that the last one, or do you have more questions?
I have one more poll. Okay. This one was on X. Again, follow us there at Locked On Hornets. The question was, the Hornets ranked 26th in ESPN Futures rankings. That's up from 29. We discussed it on today's episode. How you feeling about that ranking? That was a full question. I kind of Ron Burgundied it. I don't think I needed to read. We discussed that on today's episode.
No, not today's, but that's okay.
But here we are. And the question was, how you feeling about that ranking? And the options were thumbs up, we're moving up. Thumbs down, still too low. Still too low wins this 57.9% to 42.1%.
Okay.
So a lot of optimism in that poll. People excited that we're moving up, and then a lot of people still thinking that 26 in the future rankings is too low. And that tells me that even though people are still a little bit worried about LaMelo and wanting to see him more and what is his future ceiling, like I think people right here beginning of the season, they're still excited to see what these young players can do, and they still believe that these young players can take this franchise to new heights.
All right, questions for Media Day. What would be the questions you want answered? Mark Williams, health, is that going to be towards the top? LaMelo Ball stuff. What are some questions that you would have, Doug, if you were in attendance?
Yeah, for sure. For LaMelo, Miles Bridges confirmed in his interview with the Charlotte Observer that not only is LaMelo wearing ankle braces, but also Brandon Miller. So I want to hear more about what LaMelo is doing to stay healthy. You can't avoid the freak stuff, but what is he doing to stay healthy? I want to hear more from the players about how they're interacting with this new training staff. I would love to hear more from players about just their feeling on the franchise direction with this new ownership group and with Jeff Peterson. Is there a sense of belief this season that is different than previous seasons? That's what I would really be interested in, because I think I have a sneaking suspicion that yes, that all of these things, the addition of Coach Lee, the some of the moves that they made in the offseason, the draft picks, I think that there should be a different sense of belief from these players. I would be interested to hear their thoughts on that. And then Mark Williams' injury, I think that's a big deal as well. And then Brandon Miller, what's he focused on improving in year two? How big is he? I want to hear more about his strength. So I think all of those things are top of my list.
Yeah, so these things get pretty hectic, but the Wes and Walker show will be out at the Spectrum Center today, hosting from 12 to 3. Media Day will be taking place from 11 to 2, and usually it lasts longer than 3 hours. So I would expect it to go past that, but it's supposed to start at 11. So we'll be having guys come onto the show. We'll be able to interview them. I don't know what the schedule is going to be like player-wise, but I do think we're going to get both Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson today. So stay tuned, WFNZ, WFNZ app, 92.7 FM. We'll be talking with those guys from 12 to 3. Big interviews there. I think also we're supposed to speak to Tijan Salon, so that would be cool. The language barrier will be interesting as far as a radio interview. Yeah, that'll
Get
be
on Duolingo right now. Brush up on en français.
But he seems real engaging and fun, and that was one of my biggest takeaways from Hornets Real Access, just how much of a cool guy Salon seems to be. And obviously the motor is there, but just taking it all in. So hopefully that's a fun one. But yeah, excited about that one.
Well, I need you to ask how he plans to make the fire in the crowd. I need to follow up to that great quote. He said after he was drafted, he was focused on making fire in the crowd. I want to know, what's he going to do to make fire in the crowd?
I also want to know if Eye of the Tiger really is his favorite song. I need to know, were you lying, or is that for real? Do you listen to that just hanging out in the car, driving back to practice and driving to and from practice?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, like, maybe. That's, the big pop song in the 80s being a big hit overseas, like that's a trope, you know? I mean, like what is it? The guy from Baywatch is big in Germany, you know, David Hasselhoff. That doesn't surprise me. Like a big American pop hit being still beloved in Europe is not surprising to me. So that I would not be shocked.
We'll ask the hard-hitting questions on Wes and Walker. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free, available anywhere you get your pods, and that includes YouTube. Find Doug on a Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com.
It would be a weird thing to lie about. That's what I'm saying. Like to lie about Eye of the Tiger. To maybe that's lost in translation. It's like I want to appeal to the American crowd, so I'm going to go Rocky here. And if he were drafted by Philly, that would make sense. But
I mean, yeah, I could see it though. Like, hey, I'm getting drafted. This is the classic song people go with a motivating montage to get you ready for the NBA. That's it. I don't know. Maybe not. I'm Walker Mail. Again, listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday, 12 to 3. And we got a lot to get to tomorrow as well after Hornets Media Day. Come back right here on the YouTube channel, also anywhere you get your pods. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.